Ok, ok. Boa tarde, pessoal. Essa live aqui vai ser sobre São João Paulo II. Mais especificamente, sobre o que aconteceu no Encontro de Assis de 1986. Aqui, mais uma vez, eu vou estar reagindo a uma entrevista do Diácono Dragani ao Michael Lofton do Reason Theology. Beleza, né? Vamos começar.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael, on a Thursday, joined by Father Deacon Anthony Dragani. We are talking about John Paul II, 1986 Assisi World Prayer Meeting. That comes up quite frequently whenever people accuse the Pope of idolatry, in fact. And so one of the things that comes up a lot is the Pachamama event, which Father Dragani, about a month ago, did a video here on this channel on that subject, walked through the ceremony play by play and explained to us what happened in the ceremony and weighs in for us on whether or not Pope Francis is guilty of idolatry. Go and check out the video if you haven't already. I'll put it in the show notes. But for this one, we're talking about John Paul II, 1986. This was kind of your Pachamama controversy before there ever was one, right? In 1986. Welcome back to the show, Father Deacon. How are you?
Terrific, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you. Excited about this one. And by the way, we are also going to be doing a video next month on the Canada visit of Pope Francis and walking through a ceremony that he was involved in there as well. So y'all look for it. By the way, I do want to mention to y'all the book that I just put out, Church Crisis. It's a free ebook. You can see it right there on the screen. Don't mean to cover you up, Father Dragani, but that's how the overlay is right now. But there it is, Church Chaos, Biblical Insights for Confused Catholics. It's a free ebook. If you're confused about the crisis in the Catholic Church right now, you don't know what to do, or it's preventing you from converting to Catholicism, or you're thinking about leaving, read that book. Like I said, it's free. Go to reasonandtheology.com. That's the website here. And once you go there, you'll see a pop-up for it. Just simply click on it and you'll put in your email and it will give you the PDF right then and there. And so certainly check it out if you're confused. But okay, maybe tell us a little bit about this event in 1986. Maybe set the stage for us.
Certainly. So the key thing to remember here is what was going on in the world at the time. This was the height of the Cold War. And in Europe especially, there was a lot of fear that nuclear war was right around the corner. Annihilation of humanity. That was the fear. And at the same time, we saw a major rise in secularism. And one of the reasons for that was that there's a narrative being spun that religion leads to warfare and violence. That was one of the main talking points of the communists, for example, that so many wars are fought over religion that society would be a much better place if there was no religion. A good example of this is the song Imagine by John Lennon. Imagine no religion, this peaceful, perfect world.
All right.
So that was the narrative. The world was afraid. Nuclear war seemed imminent. And religion was being spun as being a tool of violence and something that leads to more warfare and more violence. And Pope John Paul II really wanted to kind of turn this narrative on its head. So we felt, first of all, it was really important that there be some sort of major action towards world peace. And he thought that religion could be used as a vehicle to promote this. So he had this idea of having different religious leaders from around the world come together, and he chose the place to be Assisi in Italy, the home of St. Francis. And it's because St. Francis has been known historically as the man of peace. Peace was something that was very central to him. Plus, he also was known for, having dialogues with the, different leaders from other faiths. For example, he had a long dialogue with a Muslim leader in Egypt. So this seemed like the ideal place to do it, in the shadow of Francis of Assisi, and not in Rome. He didn't want it to be done in Rome because, number one, if it was done in Rome, it wouldn't be like a level playing field, so to speak. World leaders going to Rome is a little different than them meeting together on a more neutral territory. Even though Assisi wasn't neutral territory, it was a different message than meeting up in Rome. So that was his goal, to pray for world peace, and to show the world that religion could be a tool for peace rather than something that leads to more warfare and violence. That was what he wanted to have happen. So, like I said, religious leaders from around the world were invited to this. Simultaneously, a number of governments around the world declared there would be no fighting that day. So this was a request that the Holy Father made, that there be a general ceasefire, of violence around the world. And a number of places, hotspots where there was violence, declared there would be no fighting that day, although a few of them ended up breaking that. But the other thing that Pope John Paul II was concerned about, he didn't want to give the impression of there being religious indifferentism. The idea that all religions are the same, they're all equal. And that, by the way, was an idea that was getting a lot of traction, especially in anthropology and in some religious studies disciplines. That was around the time also when Joseph Campbell and his books were very popular, The Power of Myth. And there's a lot of positive stuff in Joseph Campbell. There's some real insights in there. But at the same time, Joseph Campbell has this tendency to claim that all religions are saying the same thing. He looks at commonalities between them and argues they're all really the same. And we know as Christians that it cannot be true, because if every religion is equally true, well, they all have contradictory beliefs, so that means that nothing is true, right? So Pope John Paul II wanted to avoid that. So he purposely planned the event and framed it like this. It was not religions of the world coming together to pray. No, that was not the idea. It was religions of the world being together to pray. So they weren't praying together, but they were being together to pray. That was the idea. So there'd be no prayer in common, but rather they'd meet up and then they would go to separate locations. And there in these separate locations, they would do prayers according to their own tradition. So that was the plan. That was the idea. And in a little while, I'll show you a video of how this actually kind of unfolded and hit upon some of the controversies that arose from it. But that was the intention. And I think it was a good intention to show that religion can be a vehicle for peace and that, praying for peace is a positive thing.
Ok, a primeira parte aqui, o background, né, do encontro. Basicamente, o Diácono explica, né, que segunda metade da década de 1980 foi o pico da Guerra Fria, né? Então, em toda a humanidade, né, existia esse medo enorme de guerra nuclear, de aniquilação nuclear, né? E existia, né, cada vez mais crescente no mundo, a narrativa de que a religião era fonte de guerra e violência, né, de que o mundo seria um lugar mais pacífico se não fosse a religião, né? Então, um exemplo disso é aquela música daquele viado do John Lennon, né, o Imagine, né, que eu não sei porque que o pessoal insiste em achar bonito, não é bonito coisa nenhuma, que ela é uma música ateísta, pô, que diz exatamente isso. Imagine um mundo pacíficozinho, onde não existe céu, inferno, religião. É isso, mano. Entendeu? Eu até estou exemplo aí do Joseph Campbell, né? Que os livros dele estavam bem altos. Então existia, né, essas ideias cada vez crescentes de que a religião é fonte de violência e da guerra e que todas as religiões são iguais, né? A questão do relativismo, diferentismo religioso, essas coisas. E João Paulo II queria combater isso, né? E foi justamente para combater isso que ele pensou no Encontro de Assis. A ideia do Encontro de Assis, no caso, não seria que... No caso, seria de convidar líderes religiosos para se encontrar em Assis em particular. É tanto porque ele não queria que ocorresse em Roma, né? Ele queria que ocorresse num local relativamente neutro, né? Se ocorresse em Roma, talvez os líderes religiosos não se sentiriam confortáveis, né? Talvez não seria apropriado chamá-los para Roma, que aí transmitiria justamente a ideia de indiferentismo. Então ele preferiu chamar para Assis, né? Que é um lugar comparado a Roma mais neutro. E porque São Francisco de Assis é conhecido como o homem da paz, né? Que tem um histórico de ter tido diálogo com líderes de outras religiões e tudo. E a ideia do Encontro de Assis era que líderes religiosos do mundo inteiro irem para Assis não para rezarem juntos, não para fazer uma oração conjunta, mas, né, estarem juntos para rezar, né? Rezar no caso pela paz. Então a ideia, né, como ele vai explicar mais adiante, é que cada um estaria rezando de acordo com a sua própria tradição religiosa, entendeu? Eles não estariam rezando junto, fazendo uma oração conjunta, todos fazendo a mesma oração. Cada um está rezando de acordo com a sua tradição religiosa, mas estão todos juntos em nome de pedir pela paz, né? A ideia é justamente demonstrar que é possível, e de fato aconteceu, de as religiões do mundo inteiro se juntarem em prol não de perseguição e guerra, mas de pedir a paz, né? Fazendo o contraste com a Guerra Fria, dois países ateus que estão fazendo guerra. E é uma coisa boa, né? Como ele mesmo disse, é uma coisa boa. Não tem nada de errado por si só nisso, né?
I get the intention there. Here's some concerns that I have with that. Since some of these religions are calling on false gods, which according to scripture are demons, would this not be John Paul II inviting them to call on demons since he knows that they're not going to be calling on the one true God?
So he was inviting them to pray. He was inviting them to pray however was comfortable to them. But that really isn't the same as explicitly inviting them to call upon false gods. Prayer is something innate in human beings. There's something in us that longs for something greater than ourselves. And that's because every human being, whether they acknowledge it or not, is made in the image and likeness of God. And there's something in us that aspires towards, connecting with this God. Unfortunately, the true religion of Christianity isn't embraced or known everywhere, but people still pray because that's something that's inherent inside of us. So inviting somebody to pray, what it's doing is respecting their dignity as people and respecting that they're doing something that's kind of programmed into us. We're all meant to be religious beings one way or the other. Even atheists that I know of, some atheists become almost religious in their zeal for atheism. So calling upon people to pray, something that's inherent upon us, there's nothing wrong with that. And again, he wasn't inviting them to specifically pray to false gods, but to pray, however they feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I get that, but it's kind of like a near occasion. If you know that they are going to be doing this, should you invite them? It's like for somebody that struggles with alcohol, could you invite them over to a bar? Yeah, you could, maybe you could just have pretzels and water or something, but it's a near occasion of sin, and they're probably going to sin in that occasion.
Well, the other point of it though is this: a non-Christian praying isn't necessarily sinful to them. It isn't necessarily, because again, there's something inside of us that has this impulse to pray, to connect with a higher power. And if they're not connecting with the true God, they're still going to try and reach out to something. That's something programmed within us, and that's not necessarily sinful for them. Keep in mind that no religions were invited that explicitly pray to dark forces. Mm-hmm. For example, Satanists were not invited to participate. Mm-hmm. Religions that are known for human sacrifice or known for a dark history of evil acts, none of those were invited. Now, the religions that were invited were ones that are generally seen as being pretty benign, and which we may have some level of commonality with to one degree or the other. Mm-hmm. I would argue personally that not all religions are demonic or false. I tend to believe, this is just my personal belief, that any religion that has existed for thousands of years and sustained human civilizations probably has some core of truth to it. There's something to it that sustains people, some truth at the very core. Now, there may be many falsehoods mixed in. That is possible.
Sure.
But that doesn't take away from the fact that there may be some truth at the heart of it.
Sure.
You did a great video a week or so ago, Michael, in which you talked about St. Justin Martyr. Mm-hmm. and what he called the seeds of the Logos.
Yeah.
Many cultures, many religions have these seeds of God, seeds of Logos in them. Now, they need to be refined. They need to be drawn out and Christianized, but they're seeds of truth all over the place. And in the way that's an interesting discussion in of itself. There was a theory. It's not very popular anymore, but there's something to be said for it. There's a theory that originally, if you go back to the very beginnings of human civilization, people were originally monotheists, and they had the original religion of Adam. And then as time went on, as humanity became separated, it devolved into other things, such as polytheism and animism and whatnot. That was a theory that you find some of the church fathers espousing. And, there were some great writers, Catholic writers over the centuries who advocated this, that there was originally one true religion, and then it kind of devolved into all the different varieties. But that also explains then why there are commonalities between different religions, why you find the same myths, the same stories in different religions, because they all come from the same true religion. Now, today, this theory is not very popular, and I think that's because we have a tendency to look at religion through the lens of evolution. We see things through the lens of evolution. So it looks to us like religions begin one way and evolve into being another, right? The monotheism is a later development, but it's very possible it's actually the other way around. But at any rate, I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that every being prayed to at these events is necessarily a demon. It's possible that they're praying towards what they conceive God to be, and it's an erroneous conception. But still, if these prayers are being sent out to a higher power who they believe to be good, and it's in a spirit of good intentions, it's very possible that God hears their prayers. It's very possible. Now, that does not mean that we should not preach the gospel. We must always preach the gospel. We have a commandment to go out and baptize all the nations. That's essential. But at the same time, we shouldn't assume that everything non-Christian is automatically evil or demonic.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I read the speeches that John Paul II had with the event, and he does proclaim Christ to them. And so at the end of the event, he makes it known. He makes it very clear. And so
I'll
he
put
does,
that out.
he does-
Yeah.
yeah. So sure. So yeah, you have this video for us. Can you tell us who are maybe some of the participants? I know there were Orthodox representatives there,
Right.
Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, I think. Oh,
Yeah, there were. I think there were.
Então, o que acontece? O Michael perguntou para o Diácono sobre a questão de que compareceram no encontro de Assis animistas, politeístas, panteístas, e se talvez seria correto João Paulo II convidar essas pessoas para rezar, porque supostamente os deuses deles são os demônios. Entrando aqui no assunto rapidinho, olha, eu já vou logo aqui avisando que eu sou mais da linha do Padre Quevedo, sou mais da linha do Instituto Padre Quevedo, entendeu? Eu não acho impossível que exista influência angélica no desenvolvimento de tradições religiosas diversas, né? Agora, esse negócio que todos os deuses dos pagãos são demônios, eu não engulo, não acho que seja isso que a Bíblia está falando, e não engulo. Para mim, muito do que a gente vê nessas nossas religiões é só fantasia mesmo, é só mentira. Não tem nada a ver com demônio. Mas o Diácono explicou, que rezar, no caso de não cristãos, rezar não é necessariamente pecado, mesmo se eles estão rezando para falsos deuses. Porque, infelizmente, a verdadeira religião do cristianismo não é conhecida ou abraçada por todos em todo o mundo, Mas as pessoas em todo o mundo ainda rezam, porque isso é algo inerente do ser humano, é algo inato do ser humano, porque o homem foi criado à imagem e semelhança de Deus. Então o homem, por natureza, precisa recorrer a algo maior do que ele. Ele precisa procurar por esse ser superior. Ele precisa rezar. Entende? Então, não há problema por si só em pedir, né, a não cristãos, não monoteístas até, para rezar, porque o fato de eles estarem rezando não quer dizer necessariamente que estejam pecando, né? E até entra na questão das sementes do Logos, né? Que o Marco fez um vídeo a respeito de São Justino Marte, que São Justino Marte mesmo promoveu essa ideia, né? Das sementes do Logos, né? Logos, no caso, é Jesus Cristo. Dando spoiler aqui, sementes de Jesus, né? Presente nas tradições religiosas do mundo inteiro. Ele basicamente explica que existem nas falsas religiões coisas verdadeiras, coisas que coincidem com o catolicismo romano, coisas que coincidem com a tradição judaica, com a tradição católica, e que são, de fato, sementes do Logos, são, de fato, coisas que Deus providencialmente deixou naquelas religiões, permitiu desenvolver-se naquelas religiões por N razões, para prepará-los para aceitar o cristianismo. Entende? Então ele até fala de uma teoria antropológica, né? Que hoje não é muito popular, de que inicialmente, né, a princípio, só existia uma tradição religiosa, só existia uma religião que era monoteísta, e dessa religião monoteísta é que surgiu o resto, né? Que é uma coisa que muitos padres da igreja defendiam, muita gente da história da igreja defendia, que explicaria, né, de forma muito interessante, a razão de haver certas similaridades entre as diferentes religiões, né, de haverem tradições similares, crenças similares, práticas similares, histórias similares, né? Que hoje em dia não é muito popular, porque geralmente as pessoas costumam ver religião, né, desenvolvimento de religião, aos olhos da teoria da evolução, né? Mas que aí é outro assunto que eu também não tenho a menor vontade de discutir. Mas enfim. E que, né, justamente por causa disso tudo, a gente não pode assumir que todas as religiões não cristãs sejam necessariamente satanismo, culto ao diabo, que sejam necessariamente demoníacas ou, né, culto às forças das trevas, entendeu? Às vezes é só uma tentativa natural, né, de tentar alcançar Deus, né? Não sucede de forma plena, porque só quem sucede de forma plena é o cristianismo, é só o catolicismo. Mas é uma tentativa que, quando você entende as circunstâncias em que surgiu, a sua história, essas coisas, não é totalmente legítimo. Até ele explica, ele até fala, né, que religiões que cultuam explicitamente forças das trevas não foram convidadas, né? Satanistas não foram convidados, religiões que fazem sacrifícios humanos não foram convidadas, exatamente por isso, porque a ideia era unir somente as religiões que são benignas e que tentam alcançar o bem. Não tem sentido, né, chamar para rezar pela paz religiões que não desejam a paz. Aquele, por último, né, ele até perguntou sobre as pessoas presentes, né, falou de patriarcas ortodoxos aqui. Vamos continuar.
12 major religions represented, but within them there were like subgroups, like different denominations within Christianity. I know some of the main ones present. There was the Patriarch of Moscow at the time. I think either the Romanian or Bulgarian, one or the other, the Romanian or Bulgarian patriarch was there. The video, I think, identifies who's who. I also know that there was a representative of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Yeah. The Patriarch himself could not be there, but he sent a representative. And then the Archbishop of Canterbury was there, representing the Anglican Communion. And then there was also Jewish representatives, like the chief rabbi of Rome was there. Representing Hinduism, I believe it was the nephew of Gandhi, and then another Hindu representatives. There were some Zoroastrians present. There were Native Americans present as well, 2 Native Americans. Muslims were present. And of course, Buddhists were present, led by the Dalai Lama. And we'll get to that in a little bit later, because that became one of the main scandals of the event, is what happened there. But Buddhists were present.
Yeah, we certainly need to touch on that issue. So, okay. Well, yeah, if you want, let's go ahead and bring up the video. Let's take a look. Give us a play-by-play.
Sure. I'm going to load it up right now.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I said in the chat there, the patriarch of of Russia was there. There goes Vigano's third Rome theory.
the third Rome, yes. He also was defiled.
If y'all don't know, go and watch the video I did earlier today where Vigano is pushing Russia really hard. So
Okay, I loaded the video in. How do I make it play?
Ok.
Ok, né, antes de começar a análise do vídeo, né? Basicamente ele fez uma listagem, né, de quem apareceu, né? Basicamente as 12 maiores religiões do mundo apareceram, né? As 12 maiores e subgrupos dentro delas, né? Como, né, teve católicos, teve anglicanos, teve ortodoxos, essas coisas. Aí teve budistas, hindus, shintoístas, nativos americanos, essas coisas. Entre as pessoas que apareceram estava o neto do Gandhi, né, da parte do hinduísmo, se não me engano, e a pessoa que na época era o Dalai Lama, né? Não sei se é o Dalai Lama de hoje em dia, mas é o Dalai Lama na época. Beleza, começando. 27 de outubro de 1986, Assis, Itália.
There it is. Great. And I have control of it now. So
Yep.
Let me give a little context for this, first of all. I hunted and I searched. There is not a lot of video footage of this day available that's readily easy to find. And I was looking for something neutral that perhaps gave a Catholic perspective or no commentary at all. I couldn't find anything. All I could find is this video that you actually sent to me, Michael. And it's a video that's very polemical against the event.
Sure.
And I was able to track down where the video came from. At first, I thought it was like maybe the SSPX or, a traditional Catholic group. But actually, this video was put together by an old calendarist Orthodox group.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, certainly interesting. And the first time I came across this was 2006. I was brand new Christian, just had really, converted, and, I'd been exposed to Christianity before that. But for those of y'all who know my testimony, in 2006, I really had a profound conversion. And the group that converted me, immediately showed me a video of Dave Hunt, who is a Protestant guy. I think the Brethren is who he was part of. Dave Hunt's video, A Woman Who Rides the Beast. And it had video footage of John Paul II there. And they're saying, see, one world religion, idolatry, the book of Revelation, being fulfilled in our midst, and all kinds of stuff. So I have seen it there. And then the other footage is, like you said, from the old calendarist Orthodox. Other than that, I've never really found any other footage of the event.
I've never actually seen substantial footage from a Catholic perspective.
Yeah.
I'm thinking what happened is there were news stories at the time, and the footage was captured by certain people, but probably the people who were most interested in holding on to it were the ones who wanted to use it as proof of the evils of Catholicism. Or who wanted to go against Pope John Paul II. So they seem to be the ones who preserve the footage in a way that you can find it online, at least. I imagine somewhere there's neutral Catholic footage, but this particular footage was compiled by this Orthodox old calendarist group who called themselves the Genuine Orthodox Church of Greece, otherwise known as the Synod and Resistance. So their interest here isn't just showing how evil Catholicism is, but their interest is also showing that the Orthodox participants are heretics.
And that's what's curious, because anytime Assisi is brought up, I'll always have some Orthodox who jumps in and says, this is why you need to convert to Orthodoxy. And then I point out, but wait, you have Orthodox who are present there. And so the point is, this is exactly how people end up leaving Catholicism, going to Orthodoxy. Then they find out in Orthodoxy that a lot of the criticisms they had of Catholicism then apply to the Orthodox. So then they find themselves in these kind of sedevacantist groups of Orthodoxy. They're not the same as sedevacantist, but it's kind of those fringe outside of world Orthodoxy and canonical Orthodoxy groups.
Exactly. So for those who aren't familiar with the Orthodox world, the genuine Orthodox Church of Greece is not the genuine Orthodox Church of Greece, right? This is a kind of like a SSPX or even more
Mhm.
schismatic group than that within
Yeah.
Orthodoxy.
Yeah, it's a breakaway group.
Hmm. So this video is from them, and I'm going to play it with the commentary because the commentary is extremely negative and biased, but it reflects the common things you're going to see about this online.
Mhm.
So I'm going to let the commentary play, and then I'm going to offer my thoughts on it as well then.
Perfect.
All right, so I'm just going to jump right into it.
Beleza, então ele explicou rapidinho aqui que basicamente ele procurou, né, mas ele não conseguiu achar filmagens, né, do Encontro de Assis que fossem neutras ou que oferecessem uma perspectiva católica, né, disso. O que ele achou foi esse vídeo aí que foi feito por um grupo de ortodoxos veterocalendaristas, né, que eles explicaram rapidinho. Veterocalendaristas são basicamente os sedevacantistas do ortodoxismo, né? Então eles fizeram isso aqui tanto para acusar São João Paulo II quanto para acusar os patriarcas de serem hereges, né? Então, sei lá, né, se você é ortodoxo, considere isso como uma fonte, né, de defesa do patriarca, sei lá. Apesar de que eu não sou ortodoxo, eu sou católico. Mas é só isso, basicamente, né? Vamos começar o vídeo.
So, of course, this is on October 27th of 1986 in Assisi, Italy.
At the initiative of Pope John Paul II, on October the 27th, 1986, in Assisi, Italy, the first meeting of religions for the peace of the world took place. "150 representatives from 12 religions took part. Also present were the 4 great worldwide interreligious organizations: the Interreligious Association for Religious Freedom, the World Congress of Faith, the Temple of Understanding, and the World Conference on Religion."
And that, by the way, is the Dalai Lama. For those who didn't know who he is, that's the 14th Dalai Lama. And interestingly enough, he and Pope John Paul II had a real connection. And part of it is both of them lived under extremely oppressive communist regimes that try to stamp out religion.
Eu tive que sair um pouquinho e volto já. Voltei.
Pope John Paul II was under the thumb of the Soviet Union, and he dealt with them and their ire on many occasions. And the Dalai Lama was almost assassinated multiple times by the Chinese communists, and he had to escape Tibet to India for his own safety. And the two of them together kind of had a united front in some ways, where they were trying to warn the world about the evils of communism and the destruction of freedom and of religion. So there's a connection there between them. People should be aware of that.
And peace. Present were Buddhists, Muslims, Aboriginals from Africa and America, Zoroastrians, Sikhs, Hindus, and Shintoists. Also present was Elio Toaf, chief rabbi of the Central Synagogue of Rome, which the Pope had visited a few months previously. Christians of almost all confessions were represented. The World Council of Churches, Nestorians, Non-Chalcedonians, Copts, Armenians, Malabarese, Roman Catholics, Old Catholics, Anglicans, Lutherans. There were delegates from the Orthodox churches of Finland and Czechoslovakia, the Patriarchate of Bulgaria, the Patriarchate of Romania, the Patriarchate of Georgia, the Patriarchate of Moscow, and the Patriarchate of Antioch.
So we can see right there that there was quite a representation of Eastern Orthodoxy there.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear. I'm not sure necessarily who the delegates were. Some of them may have been patriarchs. Perhaps they were not. I had a hard time finding exact information on that. So either they're patriarchs or they were like archbishops or somebody representing the patriarch. It's hard to tell, and the pictures are sufficiently blurry. It's hard to identify faces. So I'm not sure if that was actually the Patriarch of Moscow or one of his representatives. But my guess is it may have been the Patriarch. I don't know. But at any rate, there was quite an Orthodox contingent there.
Yeah, certainly.
A special place next to the Pope was occupied by Archbishop Runcie, the presiding bishop of the Anglicans, and Archbishop Methodius of Thyatira, the representative of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. The churches of Alexandria and Jerusalem declared their spiritual assent with messages. The Pope was the only speaker.
And this is the only speaker at this point. And of course, Pope John Paul II. But what's interesting is the content of the speech, which is about peace and how peace comes through Jesus Christ. He made a major point of that Jesus Christ is the bringer of peace. So he in no way tried to water down his Christian theology. He in no way tried to say that all religions are equal.
Yeah.
He gave a very strong Christian witness here, very strong Christian witness. And by the way, this narrative that people spin that Pope John Paul II had this event to show that all religions are equal and that you don't have to be Christian or whatnot, that doesn't line up with his life, because this is a man who spent his life traveling around the globe preaching about Jesus Christ to people. I mean, he was an epic missionary in that sense. So to think you'd have an event where he downplayed Jesus or the centrality of Christ doesn't really line up with who he is. And this speech,
or what he says in the speech. So
the speech is a witness to Jesus.
Então, basicamente está explicando que até então esse era o único discurso, né? Onde ele fala de paz e como a paz vem através de Jesus Cristo, né? Ele está claramente falando, né, sobre nosso Senhor e Salvador Jesus Cristo. Então, se vê aí que durante o discurso ele não tenta diluir a teologia cristã, ele não diz que todas as religiões são iguais. Não, ele está falando de nosso Senhor Jesus Cristo, meu irmão. A paz vem por Jesus, né? Que essa acusação, né, de que João Paulo II seja de indiferentista, relativista, essas coisas, é um negócio que não faz nem sentido com a vida dele, né, ou com o discurso.
In his address, he equated the prayer of Christians to the true and only God with the prayer of all other religions.
Completely false, by the way. If you read the text of the speech, that is not at all what happened.
Right.
But again, this is commentary with an agenda.
Right. Yeah.
But I'd urge anyone to actually look up the speech. You can find the text online. It's very Christ-centric.
Yeah, I'll put links to those in the description. I read them beforehand, and yeah, that you're absolutely right. That's abundantly false what we just heard.
Yeah, that's the commentary at work. Spin.
Yep.
Então, basicamente, a pessoa, né, que montou esse vídeo, que eu já expliquei quem foi, o que ela era, né? Falou que o João Paulo II tá convidando tá falando sobre como todas as religiões adoram o mesmo, todas as religiões adoram o mesmo Deus. Mentira, né? Aparentemente tem um discurso, né, uma transcrição do discurso online, né? Vou procurar aqui. Eu abri aqui 3 discursos. Em 27 de outubro, né, relacionados ao Dia de Oração pela Paz. Esse aqui. Isso aqui é do dia 24, né? Nesse discurso aqui do dia 24 ele fala, né, Jesus Cristo, né? Não sei se é esse que eles estão falando. Aqui confirmou não. Tendo então rezado separadamente, nós devemos meditar em silêncio. Esses documentos aqui são uma boa fonte, né, para dizer, para falar sobre o que aconteceu lá, né? Os objetivos, né? Acho que é esse aqui, esse discurso. Jesus Cristo nossa paz, é o príncipe da paz, né? O João Paulo II teve vários discursos relacionados, em todos ele fala de Jesus, em todos ele fala, né, na salvação, entendeu? Eles estão certos, realmente. Tem nada com sincretismo, com relativismo, indiferentismo. Ele afirma explicitamente o cristianismo aqui. Quando for depois eu ponho os links disso aqui na descrição.
It is the result of prayer.
Peace, he emphasized, is a fruit of prayer, which in the various religions expresses a relationship with a supreme power.
With a supreme power that surpasses our human capacities alone.
The Pope's speech was followed by silent prayer, joint prayer.
No, it was not joint prayer. That was key. There was a moment of silence. People could pray if they wished, but Pope John Paul II was very clear there was no joint prayer. People were praying separately.
Então, o Diácono explicou, né? Basicamente, o cara do vídeo, né? Acusou João Paulo II de ter feito oração conjunta com o pessoal não cristão, né? Aí esclareceu que não. É só um momento de silêncio, né? Quem quisesse rezar, rezava, mas não dá pra acusar ninguém de oração conjunta aqui, até porque João Paulo II, eu acabei de ler aqui o discurso dele, e foi bem explícito em falar de não haver oração conjunta, né? De cada um rezar separadamente.
Those of other religions were assigned Christian churches to perform their worship services.
Okay, this is where the scandal comes in. So the organizers of the event made, in my opinion, a bad judgment call. And here is, I think, their number one mistake. So the plan was that these world leaders of different religions would gather together. There'd be a speech by Pope John Paul II, and then they'd go into separate locations to pray. And some of these separate locations were pretty innocuous. Like some people were put in a town hall, others in a room in a monastery or a room in a convent, a large area. But for some reason, some of the groups were given churches to pray in. And I think that was a bad judgment call on the part of the organizers. Because, churches are holy places. They're consecrated for a purpose. And having another religion conduct their service in a consecrated Christian church, I think it's not supposed to happen like that. And I think as well that it sends the wrong message. Now, I'm pretty positive Pope John Paul II did not make this judgment call himself. He left this in the hands of the organizers. And this was organized by a few groups. One of the main ones, of course, was the Vatican's, was it the Council for Interreligious Dialogue? Mm-hmm. And there was also a group called the I want to say it's Egido. It's a different word for St. Giles Society. They were one of the main promoters of this as well. And they had a role in organizing it, as did the Franciscans in Assisi. So for whatever reason, somebody made the call to allow non-Christian groups to use Christian churches to pray in, which again, I think that's what led to many of the problems that came out of this. And we're going to see here the main one, and we'll listen to his commentary, and then I'll give more background on what really happened.
Okay. And to pray.
Então, basicamente, é aqui que começa o escândalo, né? Basicamente, os organizadores do evento, né, que incluem a Comissão para Diálogo Interreligioso, né, o grupo Santo Guido, né, aparentemente, e algumas ordens religiosas, né, como os franciscanos, né, foram os responsáveis por organizar o evento. E eles tiveram essa ideia horrível, essa ideia que não tem nada a ver, de pôr não cristãos para rezar em igrejas cristãs, né? Na hora que eles foram fazer essa oração pela paz, né, cada grupo religioso foi para um lugar separado, né, para fazer a sua oração do jeito que queria. Aí eles foram designados para salões, né, quartos, essas coisas. E teve essa ideia horrível de colocar não cristãos para rezar em igrejas cristãs, que é um negócio completamente inapropriado. E o resultado é que meteram, né, isso aqui no caso é que meteram budistas para rezar numa igreja cristã, né? Depois acaba sendo falado que meteram hindus para rezar em igreja cristã também. Não tem nada a ver. E aí aconteceu, né, o desastre, né, o escândalo aqui.
Pray for peace. The Buddhists prayed in the parish church of St. Peter. They placed a small statue of Buddha on the altar.
And who are they praying to, these Buddhists?
Okay, so a few points here. What he said actually was not completely correct. It was actually worse. They placed the statue of Buddha on top of the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. Now, let me first explain how that happened. Mm-hmm. So they were given this church to pray in, but it wasn't clear to them what the limits of their activity could be.
Right.
And without ill intention, they put a statue of Buddha on top of the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. Now, was the Eucharist in the tabernacle? I can't say. I would assume it might have been. Mm-hmm. There's a practice you find in many places where, in Europe, for example, if they're having a concert in a church, they usually will take the Blessed Sacrament out of the tabernacle. Not always, but often that happens. I don't know if that happened here or not. I don't know. Yeah. And I searched, I couldn't find anything on one way or the other. But either way, placing a statue of Buddha on top of the tabernacle is not wise by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
That being said, nobody approved this. None of the Catholic organizers thought this was going to happen. Mm-hmm. Now, I've read multiple accounts of what took place here. Most of them give the same narrative, which was the Buddhists took a statue of Buddha, put it on the tabernacle, and began praying. And as soon as that happened, one of the Franciscan priests there walked up to them, explained that this was inappropriate, and the Dalai Lama apologized and had it removed. It was only there a matter of minutes. Mm-hmm. Most accounts say that. Now, there's another account going around that's very different that says that a Benedictine priest saw this, went up and said this needed to stop. And then the organizers had the police violently remove him from the premises. Now, that narrative seems to be put forth on sites that are very anti-Pope John Paul II or very anti-Catholic. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure I believe that story. The one that makes more sense is the one that I've seen multiple places where as soon as this was witnessed, the Buddhists were told this was inappropriate, they apologized, and they took it off. But you asked, who are they praying to? Who are they
Correct.
praying to?
Right.
All right. So let me give you some context here. So very often when Catholics pray, sometimes they'll use the language, I'm praying to Mary, or I'm praying to St. Anthony. And Protestant Christians will hear that and think, oh my gosh, they're worshiping Mary, or they're worshiping St. Anthony. And that's because the word pray has come to take on different connotations in different religious traditions. In Catholicism, we tend to use the older meaning of the word pray, which means simply to ask. So typically when a Catholic is praying, that means they're asking intercession from a saint. It doesn't always imply worship. But in Protestantism, the word pray has come to imply worship, which creates a lot of confusion, right? So I want to be clear here. There may be some exceptions, but in general, Buddhists do not worship Buddha. Buddhists do not worship Buddha. As a matter of fact, they look to Buddha more like we look at a saint. Mm-hmm. They see him as an example. They see him as a model worth following, but they do not worship him as a god. As a matter of fact, on the question of God, of an all-powerful God, Buddhism is somewhat agnostic. They don't claim to have an answer on that. There may be a God, there may not be a God. They don't know, they don't claim to know. So they do not worship Buddha as a god. So some might describe that as an idol of Buddha. I think a more accurate description would be maybe a religious statue, kind of like a statue of Mary or a statue of another saint. That's how they would view it. They don't worship Buddha as a god. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure that somebody is going to say in the comments, but these were Tibetan Buddhists. Tibetan Buddhists are polytheistic. They worship gods. That is entirely accurate. That's not entirely accurate. The reason people say that is if you look at the literature of the Tibetan Buddhists, mm-hmm. they sometimes use language to talk about different spiritual beings. And one of the words they use is often translated as gods. Mm-hmm. But what they're really talking about are good spirits, and they also talk about devils, which are bad spirits. So mm-hmm. they're talking more along the lines of angels and demons. But the word they use in the Tibetan literature is oftentimes translated as gods. So people believe they're polytheistic. But if you really delve into the heart of Tibetan Buddhism, like other Buddhists, they do not worship these as gods in the same sense that Christians worship God. Rather, they venerate holy people and they venerate angelic beings they see as protectors. Mm-hmm. So who are they praying to? Well, if you would ask the Dalai Lama, he would say he's praying to Buddha. Mm-hmm. But what he's doing is more akin to asking intercession than worshiping. Mm-hmm. Now, again, you can probably find some literature somewhere that translates what they're doing as worship. I mean, you can find all kinds of translations of different things. But, if you really get into the heart of Tibetan Buddhism, what's taking place here is more akin to a Catholic venerating Mary than it is to a Catholic worshiping God.
Or asking Mary for her intercession.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. But at any rate, what happened here was a terrible mistake, right? Mm-hmm. There should have been something put in place to stop this. It was an oversight by the organizers. But again, it was something that was only up long enough to get some good video footage of it mm-hmm. for purposes like this. How long it was there, I can't find an exact account of how many minutes or hours, but most of the accounts I read said it was relatively quickly handled.
Now, the Hindus were also present. Do they have any details of what was going on with them? Because they are, in fact, worshiping other deities.
Right. The Hindus are, in fact, worshiping other deities. Mm-hmm. Although, that's a whole other story. If you go deep enough into Hinduism, they're not actually polytheists, they're pantheists. Mm-hmm. But what they're doing, they would describe as worshiping other deities, for sure, yes. Mm-hmm. Were they given a church? Were they given another location? I could find no details on that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure where they were at. Maybe the video shows them, but I don't recall it doing that. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that it would be fair to say the Hindus were worshiping other deities.
Mm-hmm. And see, that's what the problem is, to provide them a place to worship their false gods. That's where I think there's an issue. Right.
Now, again, them worshiping the false gods, is it possible that without realizing it, they're giving worship to the true God? Maybe. But again, I don't think it'd be appropriate to give them a Christian prayer space for that purpose.
Mhm. And even if they are, like, let's say that God hears their prayers because they somehow have invincible ignorance, it's not through their worship that any of this is answered. It's despite their worship and their ignorance that God would answer their prayer.
It'd be despite the false elements of their worship from a Christian
Mhm.
perspective. From the Christian perspective, there are false elements to their worship. But the fact that they're reaching out towards a creator of some kind who they believe is benevolent and who has a power greater than them, to the extent that they're doing that, perhaps there's some good that can come from that.
Mhm.
All right, I'll continue with a bit more of the video.
Okay.
Então, basicamente, o que aconteceu é que os budistas tibetanos, na hora de rezar aí, eles meteram uma estátua de Buda em cima do tabernáculo. A respeito de se o Santíssimo Sacramento estava no tabernáculo, provavelmente não. É costumeiro, em alguns lugares, que quando vai ter alguma reunião, algum evento na igreja, eles tiram o Santíssimo Sacramento do tabernáculo. Então provavelmente não tinha o Santíssimo Sacramento ali. Mas tá, por que isso aconteceu? Isso aconteceu porque os organizadores tiveram essa ideia horrível de pôr os budistas para rezarem numa igreja cristã. E aí eles não pararam para pensar que talvez eles fizessem isso, né? Aparentemente, né, dos accounts, né, dos relatos de pessoas a respeito desse momento, isso aí durou alguns poucos minutos e um padre franciscano viu isso, falou com o Dalai Lama, explicou que isso era inapropriado, ele pediu desculpa e tirou a estátua dali. Então, apesar de que existe um relato em particular de que um padre dominicano teria visto isso e ficado indignado e pedido para a polícia meter a porrada, expulsar os caras na base da porrada, apesar de que esse relato em particular normalmente circula só em meios anticatólicos, anti-João Paulo II, essas coisas. Então, ao que tudo indica, o relato mais confiável é o primeiro, que um padre franciscano viu isso, pediu para tirarem e tiraram. Infelizmente aconteceu, paciência. Aí, no caso do Michael Lofton, perguntou a respeito de se os budistas estão cometendo idolatria aí. Aí o Diácono explicou, que estrito senso o budismo é agnóstico, o budismo não acredita na possibilidade de conhecer se existe ou não a causa primeira. No caso, o budismo, ele admite a existência de entidades intermediárias, admite a existência de deuses de outras religiões, no sentido de serem entidades intermediárias, mas a causa primeira, o Deus criador de tudo, quando se trata disso, eles são agnósticos. Até porque para eles os deuses de outras religiões não são deuses no mesmo sentido que a gente fala de Deus, que nós cristãos falamos de Deus. Para eles são só espíritos bons que se convertem ao budismo. Então, no caso aí, claro, se você fosse perguntar para o Dalai Lama, ele ia dizer que está rezando para o Buda. Mas no caso, rezar para Buda não quer dizer que ele está adorando o Buda. Quer dizer que ele está pedindo para Buda. Buda, no contexto do budismo, que é uma filosofia gnóstica, é uma pessoa iluminada, uma pessoa que alcançou a gnose. Ele está pedindo para esse Buda, esse ser humano iluminado, ajudá-los a alcançar a iluminação também. Não é realmente adoração. É a mesma coisa no catolicismo e protestantismo. No catolicismo, a gente usa o sentido mais antigo da palavra rezar, orar, que é pedir. Quando a gente reza, a gente está só pedindo. A gente reza para Nossa Senhora, a gente está pedindo para Nossa Senhora que ela interceda por nós. Ponto. No meio protestante é que rezar significa adorar. Entendeu? Então não vamos cair em negócio de petequismo, protestantismo, não. Entendeu? Budista, pode acontecer de em algumas regiões, por causa do sincretismo religioso, né, budistas darem para o Buda cultos que normalmente seriam cultos de adoração divina. Mas mesmo assim não muda o fato que na prática eles não acreditam que Buda seja Deus. Para eles, Buda é um ser humano normal que alcançou a agnose. Entendeu? Continuando.
The Hindus assembled in the church of Santa Maria Maggiore.
So, question answered. The Hindus were also given a church as well. Again, not a wise decision by any means.
Sitting around the sanctuary, they invoked the whole succession of their gods. The Muslims gathered in the monastery of St. Anthony. The Aboriginals of Africa prayed in the church of St. Gregory and prepared their peace pipes inside the sanctuary. The Shintoists were assigned to the Benedictine monastery, has ended up in joint prayers with heathens to the...
Okay, so the fact, again, that these religions were given churches to use, I think, was highly problematic. But much better if they were given spaces without religious consecration. Places that were non-religious would have been made a whole lot more sense. Again, I don't think the Pope John Paul II personally signed off on that. I think the organizers had a major oversight there. And that gave rise to these images, which are very, rightfully so, scandalous to a lot of people. So here is when it's all over, when they're done doing their individual prayers, they all come together. Now, if you listen to the commentary, he says this is when the heathens come together to have joint prayer and apostasy. But actually, there wasn't joint prayer. What happened was they all came together at the end, and then each representative was allowed to come up and make a statement or say a prayer themselves in their tradition. But it wasn't people praying together. People weren't joining in the prayers. They had a chance to give a statement or to make a prayer. So it wasn't like, all the Christian representatives were joining in the Muslim prayer, or the Pope was praying along with the Hindus, but rather people were given a chance to make a statement or say a prayer of their own tradition, with others just listening respectfully.
Supposed common father.
We are in fact here.
Então, basicamente, o cara, né, que fez o vídeo, né, ele começou a falar que no final geral se juntou para fazer a oração conjunta, apostasia, não sei o que. Mentira, entendeu? O que aconteceu foi que no final, né, os representativos de cada religião foram convidados para fazer um discurso, né, em relação à paz, ou fazer uma oração de acordo com a sua própria tradição religiosa, entendeu? Não houve oração, né, quem não era da tradição religiosa ficava só ouvindo respeitosamente, entendeu? Não houve oração conjunta nenhuma, não.
To pray, and for no other reason than to pray.
Where further, we wonder, will this journey of apostasy lead?
And by the way, the subheadings are very misleading. It says, Muslim prayer service. It wasn't a Muslim prayer service. Like I said, each religion had a representative who came up who could either make a statement or say a prayer. It wasn't like a service taking place.
In Assisi, the establishment of a World Council of Religions was proposed, analogous to the United Nations organization. An organization...
Okay, first of all, you notice they're trying to get into one world government stuff here, right?
Mm-hmm.
As some of the more extreme fringe Christian groups are apt to doing. But this picture here and pictures like this, I do think are potentially problematic. Because again, Pope John Paul II wanted to be very clear that they were praying separately. They're coming together to pray, but not pray together. But what the most people saw was this photograph or photographs like this of Christian bishops right next to Hindu and Muslim and Buddhist leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And for many people, it could strongly give the impression that all these religions are equal. And as Catholic Christians, we do not believe that, obviously. So images like this, I think, could very easily be taken out of context and used to present a picture of all religions being equal and ultimately leading to religious relativism or indifferentism.
Mm-hmm. So doesn't that kind of lend itself to the criticism that for sure this is bad optics,
Yes.
and when it's not accompanied by proper explanation, it misleads people, or certainly can lend itself to people being misled.
Absolutely, yes. And that would be, I think, a very valid criticism, a very valid criticism. In spite of the best intentions of the Holy Father, as we saw, this event gave a lot of images that could be taken out of context and used for purposes of sowing division. So, for example, when the SSPX did their formal break in 1988, this was one of the main reasons they cited for it. Was this event.
Yeah.
And, even today, if you look up Assisi 1986, of the websites that come up, 8 out of 10 are from extreme fringe groups using it as evidence of the evils of Pope John Paul II or to show the Catholic Church as an apostasy.
Yeah, like I said, that's what I first encountered when I first learned about Catholicism. This is what I was shown. And so, that's why I think, John Paul II had really good intentions here. But I think at the end of the day, this is incredibly inappropriate and imprudent because it's going to give a false impression to people.
It could. I mean, it's hard to say. Is there anything inherently wrong with Christians from different traditions coming to get together with people from other religions and talking and having dialogue? I mean, is there anything inherently wrong with, Christian leaders of different denominations coming together with Buddhist leaders and Muslim leaders and Jewish leaders and Hindu leaders having discussions? I don't think there is. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with them being in the same room. I myself have participated in panel discussions with, I've been on panels before with Muslim, Buddhist, and Buddhist leaders and rabbis. I've been
Sure.
So there are photos of me sitting next to them, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that we're all on an equal playing field. It means we're having a discussion. So I think these kind of images, they can be used badly, but at the same time, I would hope that people would try and approach them with some common sense. Pope John Paul II, again, is a man who spent his life preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. One would assume that he isn't like taking off his Christian hat for one day and becoming, a religious relativist.
Yeah, and I agree with you as far as discussions. Yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. My criticism as far as what is inappropriate and certainly imprudent is whenever you have the element of prayer involved, even though it's not joint prayer. That's when it's like, okay, I think that since this isn't being properly explained, people are going to get a certain impression, and so this shouldn't be done for that reason.
Right. And in this situation here where they're all sitting down and one at a time they're getting up and making a statement or saying a prayer could very easily be misinterpreted as joint prayer.
Exactly. That's why I say that in my opinion, at the end of the day, this shouldn't have taken place.
Or I don't think it was necessarily bad, but I think there should have been much different planning.
I think that they should have come together and just had discussions. Leave the whole prayer stuff out of it. Let's just come together and let's talk about what we can do to work towards peace. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, there's an argument to be made for leaving the prayer out of it, but I think Pope John Paul II, what he was hoping for was a demonstration that prayer could be a vehicle of peace. So I think for him, the prayer was important to what he was trying to accomplish. Whether that was prudent or not, that was a different question.
Right.
which would be distinguished by its.
Então, basicamente, eu estou comentando aqui, né, que, claro, o evento em si, quando se leva em conta as intenções, né, do Santo Padre, dos organizadores dessas coisas, não é por si só ruim, né, quando você entende que muitas das coisas que o pessoal diz que aconteceu aí não aconteceu realmente, entende que o evento não foi realmente tão ruim assim, mas que teve muita coisa aí que foi uma péssima ideia, entendeu? Como a Teresa comentaram, teve muita coisa nesse evento, né, que forneceu imagens que podem facilmente ser tiradas de contexto para acusar, né, o Papa e a Igreja de terem apostatado, de terem cometido heresia, essas coisas. Se não me engano, a Fraternidade São Pio X usou o Encontro de Assis como uma das desculpas para o cisma deles, né? Justamente por isso, né? É o tipo de coisa que normalmente não é interessante ter, a não ser que você possa catequizar no ato. Continuando.
Moral influence in matters of world peace and justice.
All right, from that point on, it wraps up. What happens is there are a few more people giving prayers or making statements, and then it's over. And then the video goes into other things later on that they see as other apostasies. So there's no point in continuing. So I'll just stop it here at this point. How do I end it?
Oh, let's see. I can do it on my end there. There we
Great.
go.
Great.
Yeah.
So after that, what ended up happening was the different religious leaders got together at the monastery, and they had a dinner, and they served food that was kind of non-offensive to the different groups present. So like vegan type stuff. And that was pretty much the day.
John Paul II also gave a closing speech, though, where he proclaimed Christ to them.
He did. That was one of with the statements and the prayers, he gave his own as well.
Yeah. And by the way, y'all can put some questions there in the chat. Make sure to put them to @Reason and Theology. So here's another one of the criticisms, in addition to what I just mentioned there.
Então, basicamente, o que aconteceu depois de tudo isso, né, é que os líderes religiosos se juntaram no monastério para ter um jantar, né, onde tiveram cuidado de não oferecer comida que ofenderia os diferentes grupos religiosos. Então foi quase um jantar vegano. Beleza, nada demais. Tem gente que vê o problema enorme nisso, mas não tem nada a ver. Eu não sei qual a obrigação do cristão de comer carne de porco, né?
About the optics of it. Another criticism would be, could we see the apostles doing such things? Is that even an appropriate question? And if so, again, could we see that? Could we see them maybe saying those who venerate or worship Baal, have them come and pray, and maybe the one true God will hear them if they're invincibly ignorant or something like that? That's where the criticism starts to come in. Can we see the apostles do this and with the situation in their day? What's your take on that?
Yeah. The apostles with the situation in their day. I can't see them doing that. But again, too, we have to consider the circumstances were different then as well. So if you had religions that were actively, actively engaged in activities that were abhorrent to the very essence of the Christian faith. So, for example, like the Greco-Roman religion, it was practicing human sacrifice. Even then, in the time of the apostles, people don't realize this, but the gladiatorial games that took place across the Roman Empire, they weren't just about entertainment. They actually were human sacrifices. The death of the gladiators were offerings to the gods. So at that point, the religions they were surrounded with were engaged in things that were extremely abhorrent at their very core. The situation in 1986 was different. The big threat to them was secularism, this idea of a world without religion. That was seen as the threat. And the sense was that those who believe in a higher power, a God, that's something we have in common that we can work with, and we should build on that. That was the sense, that there was something uniting them, which was belief in a God or a higher power of some kind. That was seen as a unifying force to be celebrated. And again, none of the religions invited were at that time engaged in anything remotely similar to human sacrifice.
Here's one from Declan. He says, shouldn't it be taken as granted that a Catholic...
Então, basicamente, a questão aí foi, né? Será que os apóstolos fariam algo desse tipo? É possível a gente imaginar os apóstolos fazendo o encontro de Assis, né? O diácono responde, né, corretamente que não, né? Porque as circunstâncias são completamente diferentes, né? O paganismo que os apóstolos conheciam era o paganismo que fazia sacrifícios humanos, né? O pessoal não se toca nisso, mas os jogos, né, de gladiadores que tinha no Império Romano, eles eram sacrifícios humanos mesmo, né? Aquilo ali era tudo oferecido aos deuses deles, entendeu? Pra eles, entendeu? Um negócio completamente diferente. Comparação com o Encontro de Assis, que esse é o tipo de coisa que fez algumas religiões serem desconvidadas, né? As religiões presentes ali na época não faziam, né, sacrifícios humanos. Se já fizeram, né, ou passaram a fazer, eu não sei. Mas na época pelo menos não faziam. Então são contextos diferentes, é complicado, né, ficar fazendo essa comparação.
and Sunni Muslim praying side by side don't think they are giving holy equal prayer to God. Optics is one thing, but common sense for the viewer is also a factor, in my opinion. Any comments on that one?
I'm not exactly sure what the question was.
I think that they're saying that since you have Catholics praying here and then you have Sunni Muslims praying after that, it should be taken for granted that they're not saying that they're equal to one another.
Yeah, this comes back to something we talked about with the whole Pachamama thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is a hermeneutic of suspicion,
Mm-hmm.
Versus a hermeneutic of charity. Like I said in the other video, I think it's important to always give the best possible interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
especially to someone that we should assume has good intentions. We shouldn't assume that Pope, whoever the Pope is automatically looking to do the most nefarious thing imaginable.
Sure.
We should assume that the intentions are good and he's trying to do something positive. So if you look at this event with the hermeneutic of charity as opposed to a hermeneutic of suspicion, you begin with the assumption that Pope John Paul II is witnessing to Jesus Christ, because that's what he always did. You begin with the assumption that they were not trying to present religions as being equal or being, all the same. That was never the interpretation that was meant to be taking place. So with a hermeneutic of charity, I think you'd come to the different conclusion than if you approach it with a hermeneutic of suspicion.
Here's another one from Father John Brown. Could this fall under the principle akin to St. Francis Xavier telling Buddhists to be better Buddhists so that they'd be more moral and better disposed to conversion to Christianity?
That's a good question. I wasn't aware that St. Francis Xavier had actually done that. I hadn't heard about that before.
Yeah, Father, maybe if you can email that to me with some more information, I'd like to take a look at that. I've heard of some similar things from Mother Teresa.
But keep in mind, too, when he's talking to Buddhists, Buddhists are open to the idea of a God, but they were not worshiping other gods either. So if you look at the core of Buddhism, a lot of it is about letting go of worldly things, trying to put the well-being of others ahead of your own desires, not being slaves to fleshly passions. A lot of the things at the core of Buddhism are very similar to Christian asceticism. So being a good Buddhist could very well be preparation to being a great Christian.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some points of commonality there. I mean, there's certainly error as well, but there's some elements that we would have in common that I could see as being preparation for the gospel. This is from the Logos Project. Does our secure, neutral world attack the virtue of religion itself by burning it into a tolerated belief which can cause violence?
I would remove the word tolerated. Yeah, I would say that our secular culture is tolerating religion less and less even today.
There's another one here.
Pronto, eles estavam ouvindo algumas perguntas da audiência, né? Que não são relevantes. Agora eu pulei aqui para essa parte que eles falam sobre João Paulo II beijar o Corão, né? Eles não vão fazer um vídeo inteiro sobre isso, né? Eu vou falar sobre isso aqui na live.
Here, on the question of John Paul II and the kissing of the Quran. What about John Paul II kissing the Quran? Will we do another video on that? No, let's go ahead and tackle it now.
Yeah, I don't think you could make a whole video out of it because it was such a quick, brief thing. So the problem is there's no documentation as to what Pope John Paul II thought when he did this. He just did it. So what was he thinking? And all we can do is speculate as to what may have been going through his mind. And there are a few possibilities. One possibility that I thought was very likely, Pope John Paul II was receiving a delegation from Iraq. So delegates from Iraq came to see him. And in this delegation, there were religious leaders, some of whom were Christian, some of whom were Muslim. So there's this combination of people coming to see him. You have, Chaldean Christians, Chaldean Catholics, and then you have Muslims, like Sunni Muslims, and they're all there together. And, when you have a group of people in front of you from different traditions, you might be confused as to who is who. So somebody's handing him a ornate book. He may think this is one of the Christian delegates handing him a gospel book. I think that's a very likely possibility that somebody put a book in his face. He knew he was just talking to a patriarch a moment earlier. It wouldn't be illogical to think that somebody was giving him a gospel book. I think that's a very likely possibility, but we don't know for sure what he was thinking. He may have just been in the habit of kissing gifts, because sometimes people believe that in Middle Eastern cultures you receive a gift by kissing it. That isn't really true, but that's a belief that seems to be out there somewhere. He may have thought that was the proper thing to do, was to kiss it. He may have been aware it was a Quran, and he may have been kissing it just to show gratitude without necessarily meaning he agreed with everything in it. But again, we don't know his mind. He never answered a question about that. So all we can say is speculation. Would I say that he should be, immediately excommunicated and apostatized for kissing a Quran? No. Like I said, he may not have been aware it was a Quran. And even if he was, he may have just been kissing it reflexively. Or, he may have been trying to show respect for the elements of truth in it. It's hard to say.
But wouldn't that give, again, a wrong impression? Wouldn't it give people the impression that he's revering the fact that it denies that Jesus is the Son of God?
Yes, absolutely. That would give people the wrong impression. My suspicion is whatever happened there, he didn't think a whole lot before doing it. I think he was acting reflexively, whether or not he was aware of what the book actually was. But like I said, if you attend Eastern liturgies, and like you do, Michael, books are put in people's faces all the time, right? Gospel books all the time. At the Divine Liturgy, at the little entrance, I come through, and there's a whole line of altar boys and people there, and I line up, and they all I put the gospel book in their faces and they all kiss it.
Mhm.
Same thing after reading the gospel, people are kissing the gospel book. So if he's with a delegation that's a lot of Eastern Christians, and he's familiar with their services, if you're in an Eastern Christian environment and somebody puts a book in your face, what you do is kiss it.
Mhm.
That's probably what he was thinking.
Did he ever come back and clarify, hey, here's what happened, here's, what I intended, stuff like that?
Not that I could find.
And that seems to be an issue in and of itself, in my opinion. Because if he was ignorant of what it would be helpful to come out and say that. And if he wasn't, and he knew it was a Quran, then it would be helpful to come out and say why he still did it. Right. So either way, it seems like he should say something.
Maybe not. Here's the thing. If you respond to your critics, it's like feeding the troll.
Sure.
You know this all too well, I'm sure.
Oh, I know.
And a lot of people take the position that they're just not going to respond to their critics.
I get that.
And that may have been where he was coming from.
I get that. But I would say, but in this case, for the sake of all the people who aren't his critics who are confused. See, I totally get not responding to the critics, but there's so many others who love John Paul II that were confused from this. And I think, well, for their sake, one should say something, not for,
maybe
the critics.
But then again, maybe, let's say he did it by accident. He didn't know what it was. Maybe in his mind, well, it happened. I can't undo it. But maybe something good will come out of it, which was, in the Muslim world, people interpreted this as him showing respect for Islam. And maybe he saw that as something positive that came out of it, even if it was unintentional.
I think we cleared out the questions there. Did you have any concluding comments? Anything that we missed there?
Yeah, I do want to point something out here. So in the last video, we talked about the Pachamama incident, right? In this video, we talked about the Assisi situation. But there's a major difference between the two events, which was the Pachamama situation was a misinterpretation of Christians who were praying.
Right.
So what we saw with the so-called Pachamama event were Catholic Christians from the Amazon praying to our God in a way that seems foreign to most people in the West. And people assumed it was pagan or demonic. And the story began that it was an idol. Somebody gave it the name Pachamama. I'm not sure where they even came up with that because it was not Pachamama. I think a reporter used that term and it just kind of stuck. But in this situation here, these really were non-Christians. So, we have to be aware of those kind of differences. There are situations where there are non-Christians praying to non-Christian deities. And there are situations where there are Catholic Christians praying in a way that's Catholic but unfamiliar to us. So we have to kind of be aware of which is which. Yeah,
Carlos says he could have thought it was an Arabic gospel book. It's so obvious. I can't believe I didn't think of it before. I guess that shows my cultural ignorance and how.
Enfim, o que é que o Diácono Dragani explicou a respeito de João Paulo II beijar o Corão? O que a gente sabe, que é relativamente pouco, né, é que ali ele recebeu uma delegação árabe, né, que tanto era composta de islâmicos quanto era composta de cristãos, né, cristãos católicos, no caso ele usa a palavra Chaldean, né, acho que é católicos da Caldeia, se não me engano. Que é tudo árabe, né? Aí ele estava falando lá com os patriarcas, né? Pouco tempo antes. Estava falando com eles. Aí alguém ofereceu um livro ornamentado. Aí é possível, não se sabe porque ele não clarificou o assunto nunca. É possível que ele, vendo aquele livro ornamentado sendo oferecido a ele, não sabendo se a pessoa oferecendo era islâmica ou cristã, não sabendo ler árabe, mas supondo que se estava oferecendo um livro, deveria ser um cristão oferecendo um evangelho, né, um livro dos evangelhos em árabe, ele foi lá e beijou. Uma possível explicação é essa, né, que eu até vi outro comentário, não sei se foi nesse vídeo ou em outro, onde o pessoal compara, né, os nomes Corão e Evangelhos em árabe, né? E assim, dá pra ver que são nomes diferentes, mas pra quem não sabe árabe, não dá pra distinguir. Entendeu? Pra quem não sabe ler árabe, não é como se desse pra ler o Corão ali. Então é possível que ele tenha beijado porque ele achava que era um evangelho. É possível também que ele tenha beijado por reflexo, né? Porque ele tem esse reflexo de beijar os presentes que ele recebe. Então, independente de ele saber ou não, ele pegou e beijou porque é um presente. Também é possível, né, que ele soubesse que fosse um Corão e beijou para sinalizar que ele respeita as coisas contidas no Corão, que são verdadeiras, que são coerentes com o catolicismo, né, na expectativa de que os islâmicos mostrassem reciprocidade em relação aos cristãos, né, de admirar aquilo que é verdade, né. A gente não tem como ter certeza porque ele nunca esclareceu o assunto, né. Ah, por que ele não esclareceu o assunto? Primeiro porque nem sempre esclarecer o assunto ajuda, entende? A gente vê isso aí com o Papa Francisco, nem sempre ele esclarece o assunto, as polêmicas que ele se envolve, e quando ele esclarece, geralmente não adianta nada. Entendeu? As pessoas não estão dispostas a ouvir o que ele diz, não estão dispostas a ouvir a explicação dele, o pessoal quer mídia mesmo. Entendeu? Fora que mesmo se ele percebeu depois que fez besteira, que beijou o Corão, essas coisas, ele pode ter esperado que, né, isso teria consequências positivas, né, em relação à relação entre os cristãos e os islâmicos. E até a pessoa está falando, ele pode ter achado que fosse um livro dos evangelhos árabe, né, que é uma explicação possível tão óbvia que ele não acredita que não pensou nisso antes. Porque é possível mesmo. O pessoal acha que, né, livros, né, cristãos em árabe ou não existem ou são iguais aos da CNBB aqui no Brasil, né? E não, tá escrito em árabe. Nem tá necessariamente em azul, com a capa azul não. Às vezes é capa verde mesmo, né? É o que os caras conhecem, né? Eles vão fazer assim mesmo.
I've been propagandized by pop narratives. I've heard it before too. It seems like there's just no evidence either way for what exactly it was and what he thought it was.
Right.
This
What I
isn't
would
a
say though is it looked, if I saw it in that context, I would immediately think it was a gospel book.
Mhm.
That'd be my assumption because it looks just like a gospel book.
Speaking of responding to critics, got another comment here. Reminds me of the dubia to Pope Francis on Amor Laetitia not responding to the trolls. You always have to worry about making it worse. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, you do have to be careful about that. My understanding is that after the Assisi incident, Pope John Paul II, or maybe it was the Vatican office, I forget, one of them issued some sort of statement to try and make things better. I think it was the Vatican office.
Mm-hmm.
And people just took that and ran with it and tried to make it even worse than it was. So you have to be careful about that. You have to be cautious about making these situations worse by responding.
No, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of the follow up there.
I could be mistaken on that, but I recall reading that somewhere. I could be mistaken though. There isn't a lot of evidence I could find on that, but somewhere I did read that there was a response and the response actually made it worse. I read that somewhere, but I have no more details than that, unfortunately.
It's certainly a true principle that people can just take whatever and make it even worse.
Oh, I've so experienced that, I've experienced that over the years. I used to work with EWTN.
Então, basicamente, né, terminando aqui a questão do vídeo, ele está falando sobre como, né, às vezes responder a críticas, a questões, essas coisas, pode deixar a situação bem pior, né? Usando como referência o Papa Francisco. No que diz respeito a esse encontro de Assis, parece que o Vatican Office, né, o escritório do Vaticano, publicou, né, alguma coisa tentando explicar o que aconteceu ali, né, esclarecendo tudo. Não adiantou nada, né? Piorou a situação. O pessoal pegou, tirou de contexto, piorou a situação. Então, realmente, nem sempre compensa responder a críticos, né? Ficar dando explicação, porque às vezes o pessoal pega e faz o que quer, né? Infelizmente, às vezes acontece isso, de as pessoas não quererem ouvir a explicação real. Aí, né, beleza, né, tá esclarecido. Eu vou ler alguns dos comentários, né, para ver alguns adendos, alguns pontos de vista, né, a respeito disso. Mas é isso, né? Tá explicado, né? Não teve nada de oração conjunta, de relativismo, de indiferentismo religioso, né? E na dúvida supõe-se que sejam que os líderes religiosos sejam pessoas idôneas, né? Que desejam, né, na medida do possível, ter contato com Deus, né? E Deus pode, né, ouvir as orações deles, né? A igreja acredita que existe graça também fora da igreja, né? Pode não existir graça santificante, pode não existir salvação fora da igreja, mas que alguma graça, né, que não seja graça santificante existe. Vamos nos comentários. Ixi, homem lindo. Aí o Diácono, né, Dragani, ele mesmo explicou, né, que no lugar de João Paulo II, se ele visse aquele livro ali em contexto, ele ia pressupor, ele ia achar que era um evangelho mesmo, porque o livro dos evangelhos é igualzinho o Corão, né? Fora a questão de tá escrito um nome diferente, né, em árabe, mas para quem não sabe ler árabe, parece o mesmo livro mesmo. Mas claro, tem a questão também do escândalo, né? Que, claro, tem muita coisa nesse evento que não foi feita da maneira ideal, que deveria ter sido feito melhor, né? Que foi péssima ideia, né? Que as pessoas, né, vendo aquilo ali e não entendendo o contexto, com razão ficaram escandalizadas, né? Só que também tem que levar em conta, chega uma hora também que vira exagero, entendeu? Chega uma hora também que, né, fica impossível não se expor ao risco de escândalo, né? Você vê que o Nosso Senhor mesmo escandalizou, né? Ele conversava com ladrão, com prostituta, com pecador, essas coisas. Aí os fariseus escandalizados, né? Poxa. Mas o Nosso Senhor não fez nada de errado. Ele simplesmente tratou essas pessoas como seres humanos. Entendeu? Então, enquanto é verdade que muita coisa nesse evento deveria ter sido feito de maneira mais adequada, mais apropriada, não dá para dizer que é, né, uma apostasia, né, gnóstica, guenoniana, não sei o que, não dá, entendeu? Um evento, né, o que tudo indica, legítimo. E pronto. É isso, pessoal.